Today, we're supposed to get about 100 millimeters of rain here in the backwoods of Nova Scotia. But we've had an incredibly good week up until now, with 5 good days of telescope weather, or perhaps I should say 5 good nights. And the nice, cooler summer days have allowed me to get a lot of construction done over at the Microstory Observatory. While I still have to put up the shelter, the structure over the telescope, the observatory itself is now functional with power and Wi-Fi, allowing me to control the mount telescope and cameras from my lab in the cottage. And right now it's basically as good as a pier with a deck around it, a pretty good spot to go ahead and start shooting. With several days of clear skies, I wanted to take a moment to make a mosaic of a beautiful nebula that has interested me for some time. That is LBN 667, also known as the Soul Nebula. It's quite large, about 150 arc minutes by 75 arc minutes. That's about 5 by 2.5 full moons. This target is so large that even using a smaller telescope like my 81mm Apo refractor, there's just no way to shoot the whole thing with a single take. So, to capture this nebula, I'll have to make a mosaic. To do this, I'm going to jump into Nina and use my manual deep sky imaging template. This is a template that I set up a couple months ago to offer the advanced features of Nina's sequencer, while making the setup and shooting of any target fairly easy. So the first step is to find the target in the sky atlas, and then move it over into framing. Framing will show me the size of the nebula as compared to what my telescope and camera can see at the same time, and using it I can see the best way to film the nebula is to make a mosaic of 3 separate frames. So what I'll do is I'll drag the view, that white rectangular box in the center of the screen, over each section of the nebula, then click the Add Target to Sequence option on the lower left and select my template, Manual OSC. Then drag the target box over the next section of nebula and add another Manual OSC template to the sequencer. I'll do this 3 times, and each time I'll be careful to leave a little overlap between one targeting box and the next, so that later when I have PixInsight stitch the images together into a mosaic, there are shared stars between each image that PixInsight can center on. So right now we're getting about 7 to 7.5 hours of sufficient dark per night. So for the next 2 nights, each of the 3 frames of the mosaic will get 2.5 hours exposure. So using the framer, I've set 3 manual OSC templates into the sequencer. Each template will capture a different section of the nebula, shooting 28 subs, each of 300 seconds. I'm using the Uranus C planetary camera. That's an uncooled camera, which I find to be plenty adequate without cooling, with the gain set at 250 and the offset set at 10. Now, there is a problematic full moon tonight, a very full moon, 99%. It's on the other side of the sky, but it's still going to make a lot of light. So tonight, I'm going to use ZWO's duoband filter, which I have found to be excellent for scrubbing unwanted moonlight out of the sky. It's not perfect. There will be a gradient, but later on I can correct that gradient using something like Graxpert. Now I could stay up all night and babysit Nina and have it manually move the telescope to the next portion of the nebula as each sequence comes up. But happily, Nina's advanced sequencer offers an option to have Nina automatically center the scope on the target. In the sequencer, under the instructions options, go to the telescope subheading and drag the slew and center option onto the screen, placing it above the target imaging instructions. That way, as Nina finishes shooting one sequence, it will slew and center on the target of the next sequence on its own, and then begin that filming sequence. And Nina is quite reliable in its ability to plate solve slew and center accurately. As long as your focus is good, it really relies on good focus. There's a mild breeze outside, and guiding is ranging between about 0.5 and 1.0. For an 81mm telescope with a 459mm focal length, this is adequate. When I build the observatory structure, I'm going to add retractable windbreaks. Night breezes are common here, and that will help a great deal in giving the mount additional stability. That additional stability will be especially important in those nights that I put on the high focal length SCT. I know a lot of astrophotographers shun high focal length scopes. Yes, it's more difficult. Yes, it's more demanding. But the rewards are greater too. You get a greater depth of detail. And high focal length telescopes with wide apertures are wonderful for capturing fine detail within deep sky objects, or any object for that matter. The wider a telescope's aperture, the more detail it can define. At the end of 2 days, I was able to capture about 5 hours worth of light for each of the 3 sections of the mosaic. The mosaic would have benefited from another night of shooting, but the good weather is only supposed to persist for another day, and there's another target I want to be sure to shoot before the rain comes. This is Nova Scotia after all, and there's a lot more cloud and rain than clear skies. Sometimes we can go a whole month with only 2 or 3 days of clear skies. It's not usually that bad, but it can be, and this summer's weather has been particularly chaotic. So I went with what I could get after 2 days of shooting the Mosaic. And I'm pretty pleased with it. To get the most detail out of the image, I drizzled each of the images ×2 in the course of stacking, then had PixInsight stitch them together, and then ran the stitched mosaic through Grasper to remove the moonlight differential, and finally processed them all together, always running Star Exterminator or StarNet first, which minimizes star artifacts, then Blur Exterminator second, to produce the best fineness of detail, and then finally the Noise Exterminator, to bring the most out of the image. The final images were huge, 1.68 gigabytes each, and here they are, 2 different versions. This first version uses an OSC to narrowband emulation technique to really bring out the color of the different elements that comprise this nebula. And mosaicing, in addition to drizzling, allows us to zoom way in on the nebula's details, and we can get an excellent view of the dimmer stars and the stardust lanes and structures within the nebula. And the second image uses the same drizzling techniques, but here I have omitted the OSC color emulation technique so that we can portray the nebula in more natural colors. In truth, I think sometimes we who do astrophotography get so caught up with what we can do with our amazing new powerful technology that we forget the beauty of what is quite simply there by nature. And I think this latter image, the natural color image, is my favorite. How about you? What do you prefer, OSC emulation or natural color?